Lean closer, this AFY tail isn't loud, but it knows exactly where your spine lives. The first accident on Dock 12 did not look like an accident. It looked like fury had been folded into a shape, then dropped from a height. Crates lay shattered like molted shells, coolant glittered in the station's thin light, and a living creature the size of a cargo shuttle thrashed against rusted grating while its handler screamed. Seru Kith arrived with his satchel and his rules. He was of the Caelix, a narrow-bodied six-limbed species who had built their medicine around precision and distance. His forelimbs had the dexterity to tie monofilament ligatures blindfolded. His voice was a careful metronome. He held to protocols the way ships held to their orbits. Until this day, discipline had been enough. The injured creature was a Luran bull, slab-muscled shoulders like quarried stone, 4 long legs that ended in diamond-shaped pads and curled nails, a downward jaw full of herbivore laminae, and a dorsal crest that vibrated to express mood. The crest was a fan of cartilage and hollow bone, tuned by evolution to speak in infrasonic tremors. At present it spoke fear. The grating hummed under Seru's feet with the Luran's panic. Its handler, a spindle-framed Filari named Osha, shouted in a breathy trill that didn't contain enough words to make meaning. Seru smelled coolant and iodine and something sharp, like green fruit. He took in the wound. A strut from a crate had driven deep into the Luran's shoulder, breaking skin, traversing the underlying muscle sheet, and lodging between the first and second ribs near the crest root. There was blood the color of copper run through a printer flat and dark with a metallic sheen. The Luran's chest pulled in hard and let out a sound like a ship's air cycling too fast. "Back," Seru said to the handler, keeping his voice in the low band that Luran heard as calm. "Your animal's crest is overtoning. If it spikes, I will be forced to." He paused. The word euthanize was in the protocol. It sat in the mouth like a piece of glass. "Help him," Osha said, switching to Doc Pigeon. "Please, help." 2 Caelix orderlies arrived. One carried a portable restraint frame, the blossoming kind that could spin out from a ring into a web. The other prepared a pharmacological set, auto-injectors, capsules, adhesives. Seru scanned the Luran's crest, reading timbre and amplitude. Protocol said safe sedation for Luran requires subharmonic entrainment via a resonance flute or an infrasonic projector, followed by aerosolized desatron and a gentle downshift to preserve cartilage integrity. Protocol said do not attempt sedation without entrainment. Risk of cardiac arrhythmia and cartilage shatter is unacceptable. "Where is the flute?" Seru asked. There was no flute, there was no projector. Dock 12 had freight, a cracked speaker's array, 2 forklifts, and a jury-rigged coil that kept the air warm where the seals were old. Seru checked his satchel anyway. He carried instruments for 92 species, none of them musical. He raked his mind through workarounds and came up with nothing safe. He had no authority to request an infrasonic generator from security. Requisition orders took hours, and the Luran's wound would clot badly if he waited. The bull slammed its shoulder into the deck, the strut shifted. Osha's scream broke. Seru held up a hand and the orderlies froze, because that was how Caelix medicine worked, stillness first. "We can't," he said. He felt the words like he had swallowed dry grit. "The station lacks approved entrainment. Sedating him now risks death. If he breaks his crest, he will bleed into the cartilage spaces. If the heart synchrony fails, he will die. Then do something else," Osha said. The Filari had eyes like lamp black that cut the metal. "You make the pain less. He took my families across the salt flats. He remembers my scent. He is not just freight." Seru could have explained liability. He could have recited the clauses about cross-species practice on commercial docks, the way portable clinics like his were bound like ankles in ritual cord. He had said versions of those words before, and the arguments had ended with a sullen acceptance and a quiet death in a proper ward. He could feel Osha's blame like heat. Someone else arrived, pushed through the knot of onlookers without apology. She was small by station standards, broad-shouldered, in stained gray coveralls with a patch that read Paitgui Vidi Ranar in letters that had been stitched and restitched by different hands. She carried a battered hard case and a spool of soft rope slung across her body, and she moved the way people moved around moving animals, hips loose, footfalls telegraphed, attention wide and soft. "Who's in charge?" she asked, and her voice was rough and warm and utterly unafraid. The accent was Terran, though Seru couldn't place which of their hundreds of dialects. He had met humans before. They were fearless as a species and reckless as children. The ones who came to the rim picked up that combination and bent it into work. "I am Dr. Seru Kith," he said. He gave his tonic, his credentials, the list of his stations. "I am the consulting veterinarian for—" "Great," she said, already looking past him to the Luran. "I'm Dr. Mara Colt. I was on Dock 10 when I heard the crash. What's the injury?" Seru said, Penetrating trauma to the left shoulder region. Possible rib involvement. Crest dither is in the red. We lack appropriate entrainment for sedation. Okay, Mara said. She didn't look at him as she spoke. Her eyes were on the Lern's flank, the way the skin pulled in and pushed out. What's his name? Seru felt foolish for not having asked. Handler. Osha the Falari said, breath shivering the word a plea. His name is Gri. Mara said, as if tasting it. She moved closer. She said it again under her breath, not as a command, not as a test, but as an invitation. Seru felt his crest plates, a small decorative redundancy on Caelix's heads, flex in something like startlement. She took the rope from her shoulder and tied a loop in it with deft fingers. She didn't reach for the restraint frame. She didn't reach for the auto-injectors. She crouched near the Lern's head, where the crest rose and fell like a breathing fan, and she did the most astonishingly untechnological thing Seru had seen anyone do on Dock 12. She put her hand on Gri's cheek and whispered, "Easy, buddy." The words were quiet enough that Seru doubted the Lern could hear them over his own fear. But the tone, Seru's training woke up to the tone. The Caelix understood tone like chefs understood salt. The way the sound bent down and then held, neither pushing nor collapsing, was exactly placed. The Lern's crest shifted by a hair. The dish rattle hum under the deck softened. "You can't," Seru began. He had to stand on the rules because they were all that kept the station clinic from chaos. "Without entrainment." "Entrainment," Mara said. "Right. You mean getting his autonomic rhythm to match something external so we can glide him down without triggering a panic cascade. You can do it with a flute if you're lucky enough to have a flute, or you can do it with a mother's hum if you were lucky enough to be born mammal." Seru's second set of hands tightened on his satchel. "Lern are not mammal. Neurochemistry doesn't read our taxonomy charts," Mara said, a ghost of a stone. "Osha, can I touch him?" "Please," Osha said, and it was permission and prayer. "Okay," Mara said. Her voice changed again. It went softer, yes, but it also went simpler, as if she had set down a bag of tools to pick up something she could carry with her in any gravity. "Gri," she said, "I see you. I'm not going to hurt you. Easy, buddy." She placed her second hand on the bony root of the crest where it joined the skull and pressed in a slow circle. "Seru, you're right. If we just stick him, he will probably seize or crack the crest. If we breathe him down and give him something that widens his window, I think we can pull the strut without a shatter. Have you got anything that acts like a vagal brake without dropping blood pressure?" Seru tried to reassemble his intellect around what she was doing. He had drugs. He had so many drugs that sometimes he felt like a walking veal cabinet. He summoned the names. "I have 10 milliliters of Diferaz, 2 of Celox, a spray of Residine, 1 Ritmine ampule, and an old bottle of I do not know the human naming scheme. It is for earth horses. Xlazian," Mara said. She tilted her head, listening with her palm as if the crest could speak to her through the bones. "We can't use that. Wrong receptor profile for a crest dweller. But Diferaz, small dose, with a whiff of Residine if he starts bracing. And I need you to not fight me on the singing." The orderlies looked at Seru. Protocol flared up like a fever. Seru could picture the page. He had written notes in the margin about the dangers of improvisation and remembered hubris. He met Osha's eyes instead and saw a cracked mirror of the worst days of his early practice, when the bodies of patients taught him things the papers had not bothered to include. "Proceed," he said, and it felt like a fall that might be flying. "I will anchor his left forepad. Orderly Ben, prepare Diferaz at 1/10 dose. On my cue. Orderly Lynn, keep your hands out of the gap. Watch for crest spike." Mara's hum was not a song, not in the way Caelix meant music. It was a thread of sound unspooling without pattern but with purpose. Seru found himself adjusting his own breathing to match it. It had a slow in and a slower out, the kind of out-breath that nudged nerves like friendly elbows. He had studied autonomic synchrony in the abstract. It was another thing to watch a giant panicked animal soften under a human hand and a word as simple as easy. The Lern's crest moved down by a degree, like a tent taking a little more weight in the guy lines. The hum in the deck shifted. The tightness in Osha's shoulders leaked away. "Easy," Mara whispered. "Good boy. You're huge and gorgeous and I am so proud of you. There you go." She looked at Seru without taking her hand away. "Now," Seru nodded. "Ben." The orderly pressed the injector into the Lern's skin. Ben's hand didn't tremble. Caelix had training for tremors. The Diferaz systole slid in, a cold star traveling a vascular river. Grief flinched once, then subsided under the hum and the circle of pressure on his crest root. "Keep talking to him," Mara said. Seru, who had learned the language of measured doses and clean sutures, and thought of his voice as a scalpel, found his mouth trying to make the shape of those human words. "You are a good bull," he said, and felt foolish, but Osha's mouth wobbled like a smile was trying to happen in a place it had not been invited in days. "You are very large. This is inconvenient. But your size is helpful because you will not be moved by small things. We are small things. We will be gentle. Easy, Gray." The name was easier the second time. Mara's fingers found something near the crest base and pressed. The Lurin's breath slowed a fraction. She nodded as if to a beat only she heard. "On my count, Seru," she said. "We'll ease the strut. If we get bleeding, we pack and hold. If he spasms, I want Residine. Half breath through the nose." "Lurin, do not." "Half breath," Mara repeated. "Watch the nostrils." Seru placed his upper hands on the metal strut. He felt heat, he smelled fear. He felt the deep vibration of living bone. 2. "Easy, buddy." 1. They moved together. The strut lifted. Gree grunted, more pain than protest. Blood welled but did not roar. The tip of the strut slipped free with a metal on bone burr that made Seru want a flute more than he had ever wanted any instrument. "Hold," Mara said. She didn't lift her hand from the crest. With her other hand, she took a wad of sterile fabric from her case and pressed it to the wound. "Lin there'd. Gun, get me that Caelix, keep breathing. Big guy, there's my hero. Easy." Seru packed the deeper layers. It was still work he knew. Work his hands were made for. He found the muscle edges, persuaded them together, let them cling to the powdered mesh like a climbing creature to bark. He heard Mara talking the entire time. Not incantations. Not commands. She told the Lurin what the next sensation would be before it happened. As if Gree might understand the future as people do when their friends speak to them. As if the body liked surprises less than the mind did. Fear wanted to come back in with the memory of the strut. The crest lifted a fraction. Mara shifted the circle of pressure and said, "Good boy," in a way that sounded to Seru like a warm hand on the back of the neck in a cold place. They worked for a long time beneath the gallery watchers. In a circle of quiet the human had braided around a bull with 10 words and a hum. When the wound was closed and the pressure bandage seated, when the differaz had settled into a drowsy heaviness without the slide into oblivion that made crest cartilage shatter, Mara's hands eased. An ocean made a noise that might have been laughter if it hadn't been soaked in tears. Grit exhaled like a bellows emptying slowly. His crest drooped fully, not in damage but in relief. He blinked heavy lids over dark, liquid eyes and turned his face to find Osha's scent. The handler pressed his forehead to the bull's cheek and whispered something Falari that had the same music as Easy. Seru stood up, wiping blood from his lower fingers, his spine feeling new in his back. He watched Mara coil her rope. The rope had done nothing. The rope had hung on her while her voice had done everything. "You violated protocol," he said. The words were the ones he knew how to say, but they didn't taste the way they used to. She glanced at him, a tired amusement in the angle of her mouth. Her hair had escaped its tie and lay against her neck in damp curls. "Probably," she said. "You could have killed him. I still could," she said, pragmatic. "We're not done until he stands and swallows and swishes his crest through a full range without pain. We're not done until infection doesn't set in, and you know these docs. But today I think we didn't." Seru opened and closed one hand, feeling the muscles that had pressed and cut and packed, feeling the tremor that came after success and after disaster with equal right. "Your whisper," he said, because that was the only piece he didn't know where to file. "You're easy." Mara shrugged one shoulder, a human movement that looked like a mountain discarding a small line of snow. "Big animals don't speak your words," she said, "but they're geniuses at feeling you. Tone, breath, how you set your feet. You can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to a horse. Or a Lurin, apparently, so I don't lie. I tell them the truth. I tell them I'm not here to harm. I tell them what's next. I give them a rhythm they can borrow if theirs is a mess." She grinned then, a flash of teeth that had no thread in it. "Humans like to think we invented empathy. We didn't. We're just noisy about it." "Humans," Seru said, meaning the whole strange lot of them, with their ragged cleverness and their habit of walking into situations that had proper doors and choosing the windows instead. He felt the little plates on his scalp flex again, a smile in his species the way a lip is in others. "Thank you, Dr. Cole." She nodded at Osha. "Thank him," she said. He asked. Osha took both of Seru's upper hands. Falari hands were long and damp and warm. "Thank you," the handler said. "Thank you both." Station security took statements. A dock loader admitted fatigue and a knot of anger about scheduling that had made him drive too fast and stack too high. The head of the dock consortium promised a review and a new calibration on the old coil that had failed to slow the pallet in time. Seru watched Osha lead Gree to a quiet space near Dock 9 where old ships came to die in grace. Mara walked with them, a hand on Gree's neck and a soft stream of nonsense in her mouth, because nonsense with the right music is a kind of tool. That night Seru pulled up the protocol. He read until the words blurred. He found the small seeming gap where the list of approved entrainment devices didn't specify what could produce the right subharmonics, only that they must be present. He wrote a note. It felt like scratching a line in ice with a heated pin. It didn't milk a path. He slept badly. In his dreams, the hum of the station coil matched the sound of Mara's voice. In his dreams, he was very small and something very large put a hand on his cheek and told him he was good. He woke with a hollow in his chest he had never noticed before. He thought ridiculously of wanting to be the kind of doctor whose hands were as trusted as a familiar scent. Gree did not die. He swayed a little in the morning, accepted warm mash and electrolyte water, and sneezed a clot from his nostril that made Osha Brave laugh with disgust. He swished his crest through a slow arc while Mara watched from an angle, and when he held it at the apex too long she whistled softly and he brought it down. Seru measured the range. It was within a hair of safe. "Tell me," he said to Mara, not because of the learn now, but because he could either choose habit or learn, and making the second choice in the presence of a human meant being prepared for the heat of their attention. "I grew up around horses," she said. "Not bio-augmented, just plain stupidly smart earth horses, flight animals. Everything in their bodies says, the only safe distance is the one you can cross in a breath." She demonstrated with her hand a slice of air. "You get hurt around an animal like that if you treat it like it's a problem to solve instead of a nervous system to meet. My first job was Caelix. You stand with them all night while their guts try to kill them, and you talk and you breathe and you keep them moving so the pain doesn't stick. You put your hand on them and you mean it. The meaning matters." Seru thought of his training in Caelix clinics where touch was sterilized out of them except when necessary for a procedure, where a voice was a measured thing, useful for instructions and nothing else. He did not think the Caelix were wrong. Without their discipline, their precision, half the station would have been dead from panics and well-intentioned mistakes. But perhaps he thought there were two disciplines. One made your hands sure. One made your voice a place a creature could stand. They got through the week without another accident, which on Dock 12 was a minor miracle. Word spread. Not the official word, that would come later and it would be full of seals and stamps. The unofficial word was simply the story told in lunch queues and on maintenance catwalks. The alien vet had said no by the book. The human had said easy by the heart. The bull had lived by both. Osha told the story with his hands, miming the circle of pressure at the root of the crest, and his eyes went soft in a way that made people forgive him for tripping them with his tail when he got excited. 2 weeks later, the station administrator called Seru and Mara to a meeting with the Dock Oversight Board. The board was 9 people whose faces represented 9 demographic categories, but whose eyes were all the same, tired, careful, the kind of eyes that had to make decisions inside the bounds of budgets and the law. They sat at a long table that had been polished so much it had ceased being wood and become an idea of wood. "You violated protocol," the administrator said. Her voice didn't hold a weapon, but it did hold a ledger. "I did," Seru said before Mara could. He had had time to think about those 2 lines in the ice. He had decided that if there was to be punishment for the fall that had felt like flight, he would be the one to take it. "I authorized a sedation method not explicitly listed in the station's approved interventions list." "How is humming an intervention?" one of the board members asked, but it wasn't scorn. It was curiosity with the soft underbelly hidden. "It is entrainment," Seru said. "The protocol requires entrainment. It does not specify the means." Cole's hum provided the subharmonic pattern that allowed pharmacological sedation to proceed safely. In the absence of approved devices, we used an available tool. Under Section C12, discretionary substitutions are allowed when time-sensitive risk is high and harm is reduced by action. "You signed the discretionary substitutions clause?" the administrator asked, turning a screen. "I wrote it," Seru said. It wasn't pride. It was a statement of culpability. He had always believed protocols should have a narrow escape hatch for emergent circumstances. He had never expected a human voice to be the tool that fit through it. Mara cleared her throat. "Look," she said. "You can punish me if you need to. I'll keep doing what I do somewhere else if I have to. But if you put a flute on every dock, it'll be cheaper than a lawsuit and kinder than a funeral. Also, if you let your vets touch the animals like they mean it, you'll have fewer panics and fewer broken crests. And if you don't have D4 as in your emergency kits, fix that." If you do have it, make sure it's not expired. If I hadn't been there, Seru would have been right to say no. Your job is to make it so that next time he doesn't have to. There was a silence that tasted like the moment before a metal expands and the screw threads either bite or strip. Seru found his hands folded on the table in a way that humans read as calm. He was not calm. He was something else he had not thought to name. The board did not fire them. They did not commend them either. They formed a subcommittee, because the universe could be counted on to be itself, and they ordered 2 infrasonic projectors and 8 flutes and hired a filari musician to teach the dockhands how to use them in a pinch. They revised the discretionary clause to be narrower and clearer. They asked Seru to write an addendum about the use of human vocal entrainment under supervision. Mara wrote a page called Things to Try Before You Poke the Giant that began with the words breathe and tell the truth. Gree recovered fully. He returned to his work pulling sledges for Osha's family on the salt flats of Karev, and he became famous in a way only animals become famous, not with speeches but with the way people said his name in the markets like a charm. Mara printed a small image on paper, actual paper, which Seru had never thought to value before, and tacked it near the Dock 12 coil, a drawing of a Lurin crest in a soft arc, and beneath it, in human script, Easy Buddy. Seru started to use the words in the clinic, not only with Lurin, with the long-bodied rivet eels whose spines cracked if fear ran through them while the anesthetic was finding them, with the little chittering drilks who bit and were ashamed of biting, with the human children who brought him small rodents with eyes like beads. He learned, as he had learned to tie blood vessels under a field of fluid, a new dexterity. He learned where to place his hand on a crest, on a withers, on a shoulder blade. He learned what his own breath could do to his hands. He learned that meaning was a drug with a half, life you had to renew with loyalty. Once a dockhand came in with a broken arm, a human drunk enough to cuff Flint. He refused the splint, the shot, the very idea of being helped. Seru let him shout. Then he said with the soft gravity he had stolen from a Terran voice, Easy Buddy. It is going to hurt either way. Would you like it to hurt now and tomorrow, or only now? The dockhand laughed like something had tricked him into remembering he was born into a species that could choose. He let Seru set the bone. He didn't thank him. He didn't have to. The flutes arrived. They were curved lengths of composite designed to sit against alien ridges and human lips. The filari musician taught them the notes Lurin liked. The dockhands made jokes about a symphony for cargo beasts, and for a while Dock 12 sounded like a strange, tuneful market. Seru caught himself humming without thinking on his way from one bay to another, and felt the odd zing of recognition when he realized the melody was Mara's. They did not save everyone. Medicine on the rim carries failure like stations carry gravity, thin in places, heavy in others, always present. A Xeno cow in Dock 4 died of bloat while Mara and Seru were occupied with a pressure breach. A freight drake spooked and crushed a worker who had walked behind it with a bucket of fish without letting it smell the fish first. Seru put a hand on Mara's shoulder in the corridor after that one and said, "The truth is we cannot stop pain." Mara said, "The truth is we show up anyway." And they both agreed with both truths even though their hearts argued. Late one cycle, a shuttle approached with a beacon flashing in a syncopated, panicked rhythm. It limped into its berth with one thruster coughing. It carried a cargo none of them had seen before, a floating, translucent sack the size of a room, full of luminous threads, pulsing like a sea creature lost above the waterline. The handlers had masks on and moved like they were walking through a church. The sack rippled. The air tasted like sugar burned over metal. "What is that?" Seru asked, cannot and all braided in his voice. "Scaspore," Mara said. "I read about them in a journal. They're fungus but also not," she added, because human journals often used words like probably and maybe on species that had laws of their own. "They make markets live for a season when they burst. They feed everyone and seed the air with little lights and laughter. Looks like someone harvested one too early." The sack had torn along one edge. The luminous threads inside, Seru corrected himself, because calling something by its right name was another kind of grasp, had tangled around the supports, strained and snapped. The spore's breath was going out of it like a bellows through an unpatched tear. "I have to stitch it," Mara said. "With what?" Seru asked, already running through the inventory in his head and coming up with sutures that would cut like wire through jelly. "Anything will slice." "Not anything," Mara said. Her eyes had gone bright in that human way that meant she had seen something that wanted the right hands. "Fish skin," she said. "Do you have any?" "Why would we?" "Because of the drakes," she said, impatient with practical affection. "You have to dry their skins when they die so you can make their owner's ceremony wrap. Fish skin has collagen that takes a stitch and swells when it's wet. We can make a patch. Seru stared at her and then said, of course, because when a human made a wild shape with her words and then pointed to a spot she could reach, it often meant there was a bridge you couldn't see until you stepped on it. They made a patch from dried fish skin and hydrogel, soaked it warm, and stitched it to the torn edge of the skyspore's sac with ribbon suture meant for organs that did not like to be pierced. Mara pressed her hand to the sac's surface and made a sound halfway between a hum and a laugh, and the sac's pull steadied, as if its luminous threads had decided to wait one more hour before unraveling. Seru felt again the ridiculous sense that the station itself was listening. He held the hydrogel patch and the fish skin while the spore breathed, and when he looked up, Mara was looking at him the way you look at a colleague in a war. It wasn't a battle against anyone. It was a battle against the little doors that fear closed. Afterward, when the sack floated repaired and the handlers made the sign they made to absolve themselves of the guilt of having carried it, Seru sat with Mara on the edge of a loading dock and ate a hand pie she had pulled from her pocket with a flourish like a magician. It tasted of spice and heat and something that might have been onion if onions grew on ships. You ever regret coming out here? He asked because he had no sense of her origin that wasn't this dock or a voice that sounded like being told a story when you were sick. Every other day, she said cheerfully. Every day I have to write a report, he said. Every day I have to tell a handler to wait for equipment we do not have. Fewer days since you taught me to hum. As she glanced at him, eyes crinkled at the corners. I told you to tell the truth. You told me to tell the whole truth, he said. The protocols are true. So are hands. So is easy. If I had a religion it would be that word careful, she said. Words like that get you in trouble. They get you into board meetings, he said. Same thing. They laughed. The sky spore pulsed in its berth, a slow ballooning like a lung inhaling hope. Later, when it was safe, the handlers would open its sack and the dock would be full of shining motes, and people would stand under them and make wishes they didn't tell each other. Because if you weren't a little foolish about hope, what were you doing on a station on the rim? Months passed. The flutes became as ordinary as wrenches. The phrase easy buddy migrated to tongues that had no word for buddy but many for companion and colleague and kin. Caelix orderlies began to use tone like a tool instead of accidental decoration. Osh's family sent Seru a bottle of something from the salt flats that burned like honesty and tasted like home, even though he had never stepped on Karev. When the second Lurin came in with a cracked crest, this one named Pash, the flutes were right there and the projector's battery worked. It would have worked without Mara, and that was what systems were for. But Mara was there anyway, humming, telling Pash he was magnificent and ridiculous and strong enough to let them help. Seru took the right dose of the right drug at the right time and listened to Mara's tone and set his breath with hers, just a fraction slower, just a fraction steadier, and Pasha's crest did not shatter and Osha cried again, because joy gets easier each time but never easy. Near the end of the year, a young Caelix student came to shadow Seru. Her plates were small and sharp, her voice a metronome inside a bell jar. She watched Seru work and watched the way he glanced to Mara for the part of the practice you could not write. At the end of the cycle she said, "Doctor, is this human medicine?" Seru considered the question until the station lights blinked to shift and the little motes of dust that live in every station hung like newborn stars. "It is medicine," he said. "The human part is the hum. The Caelix part is the knife. I think perhaps we have always needed both. Do you think it is shameful that we did not know this?" The student asked with the flat sincerity of someone who still believed knowledge made you complete. "It would be shameful not to learn it now," Seru said. "It would be shameful to refuse to put a hand where it is needed because the protocol did not imagine the hand. It would be shameful not to say easy to a creature who needs to borrow your nervous system for a minute." He told the student the story the way Osha had told it first, with hands, because sometimes hands are better than words. He told her about steel and meat and fear and bone and a human voice running like water over hot iron until it stopped sizzling and began to sing. He told her about the taste of a decision that is also a confession. "I misfiled their tools. My categories were too small. They walked to Dock 12. The coil hummed its old song in a key that now belonged to the station as much as to the metal. The drawing of the crest still hung with its 2 human words that had been translated into 3 other languages in penciled scrawls underneath. Seru touched the corner of the paper with one fingertip, because he had learned that physical things you honor change you in physical ways. On a day that looked like any other day, Gree came back through the docking bay, his crest high, a small braided strip of colored fiber woven into it by Osha's youngest. He stopped when he saw Seru. He didn't know the Caelix word for gratitude and did not need it. He pressed his cheek into Seru's chest plate with the pressure of a being who had learned a person's scent and filed it away under safe. Seru pressed a hand to the crest root exactly where Mara had taught him and felt an infrasonic hello under his palm. He whispered in Caelix because the station had taught him his own language could carry human meanings. Easy. Friend, a small human voice behind him said, buddy, and he didn't argue because if meanings are going to survive in places like this, they need to come in many shapes. That night, Seru passed Mara in the corridor and told her a story about a student who had asked if this was human medicine. She laughed and said, tell her it's doc medicine. Tell her it's the kind that works. She looked tired. There had been a quarantine in Dock 3 and she had slept in her office, which was a cot with posters of earth animals taped above it like saints. But her eyes were still bright. He said, when you put your hand on Gree and said easy, I thought your species had a trick. Now I think you just had a truth you were willing to say out loud. Amara grinned. We're loud, she said. But also we're listening. That's the secret. Put your hand out, mean it, and then pay attention to what the body says back. Change course if you have to. Don't let pride keep you on a dumb path. All the rest is tools. Seru nodded. He thought of the protocol, of the addendum with his name on it, of the flutes hung on hooks like the station had always had hooks for them, and had just forgotten. He thought of the word easy and how it had turned into a practice, and then into a culture that lived in benches and breath and hands. He wondered how many other words were waiting on the edge of the docks, ready to be invited inside. The Rim has a way of writing its stories in oil and blood, and then wiping them up and leaving only the smell to prove anything happened. But some stories stick. People told the one about the alien vet who said no until the human said easy over beers and when they needed each other's hands. They told it on ships when an engine stuttered and the mechanic put her face against the casing and said, easy, buddy, and the engine, which had been made by hands and not hearts, ran anyway as if persuaded. They told it to children who thought monsters lived in air vents, and to dockhands on their first night shift, and to themselves when they woke shaking from dreams of too much gravity. Years later, after Seru had left Dock 12 to write protocols for a dozen stations and Mara had returned to a world where horses still lived under real sky and kept a stall empty for herself when she came to them tired and victorious, the phrase traveled. It arrived without passports and turned itself into whatever sound meant a hand on a cheek in a cold place, into whatever syllables brought a crest down without shatter. It arrived where it was needed and made itself at home. And on Dock 12, where it began, there was a drawing of a crest that had been replaced 3 times because the paper kept getting worn by fingers. Under the last one, someone had written in a hand that wasn't human or Caelix or Filari, but all of them at once. The way the Rim makes handwriting of its own easy, buddy, we mean it.